Why was she the only one in uniform holding a tray? The question echoed in Maria's mind as the heavy dining hall doors swung shut behind her, sealing her in with the sound of laughter, polished silver, and rank. Steam rose from the coffee pots she balanced, the smell of roast beef and starch filling the air. Around her, every seat gleamed with brass and authority. Generals, colonels, men who carried entire theaters of war in their signatures. And then her, a staff sergeant, invisible, standing in the corner like a misplaced shadow. She tightened her grip on the tray. Her jaw ached from clenching too long. 12 years in uniform, 2 combat deployments, 3 commendations, and somehow, here she was, serving lunch. The irony burned hotter than the coffee. "Move faster, Sergeant." Captain Dixon's voice sliced through the chatter like a blade. He didn't look at her, just adjusted his cufflinks and returned to his conversation with another officer. Maria nodded silently. She knew better than to respond. Her voice, firm, reasoned, steady, was the very thing that had gotten her here in the first place. She remembered the look he'd given her that morning in the operations tent. "Santos, we need servers for the strategy conference. You're on lunch duty." Her protest had died on her tongue. He'd smiled then, just slightly, as if daring her to speak. He remembered, too, the time she'd corrected his faulty map reading during the last training exercise. She'd been right, of course. The data had proven it, but for men like Dixon, being right wasn't the point. It was about reminding her of her place. Now, in the officers' dining hall, that place was somewhere between the coffee urn and the door. Maria moved quietly between tables, pouring, clearing, collecting empty dishes, every motion deliberate. Around her, words drifted like coded transmissions. Counterinsurgency, new budget allocations, chain of command, the usual lexicon of power. None of it invited her in. She bent to pour for a colonel whose shoulders were broad enough to block the light. He didn't even glance at her name tag. To them, she wasn't Maria Santos. She was Sergeant. Or worse, she was nobody. Still, discipline held her upright. She had learned to swallow disrespect like bitter medicine. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. It wouldn't be the last. But there was something about this particular humiliation that cut deeper. Maybe it was the setting, the bright daylight filtering through the tall windows, glinting off the metals she wasn't supposed to wear today. Maybe it was the quiet ache behind her ribs that whispered, "You don't belong here like this." She moved toward the head table where 4 generals sat, voices low but intense. The atmosphere around them was heavier, charged with decision-making that could change lives an ocean away. One of them gestured at a map spread open beside his plate. "The problem is intelligence gathering at the village level," he said, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "We can't get reliable human intel when our soldiers don't understand the culture." Maria's hand trembled slightly as she poured. She knew something about that. Her mind flickered to another room, smaller, darker, filled with the hum of flies and the taste of sand. Wardac Province, 2019. The village. The children with hollow eyes, the explosion that shook the walls. But she pushed the memory down, locking it where it belonged. This wasn't the time. The coffee filled the cup. Her hand steadied again. No one noticed. No one ever did. When she turned to leave, her eyes brushed the map on the table. She recognized the terrain, steep valleys, cut-off roads, clusters of stone huts. She'd seen it before, from the inside, not from a satellite. But it wasn't her place to speak. Her orders today were simple: serve, smile, stay silent. She took one step back, ready to fade into the background again, when the scrape of a chair froze her in place. "Sergeant." The voice was sharp, commanding. Instinct snapped her to attention before her brain caught up. "Yes, sir." The general speaking was silver-haired, eyes piercing blue beneath heavy brows. His gaze didn't waver. He wasn't looking at her face, or not just her face. His eyes dropped to her chest, and for a heartbeat she braced for the usual kind of scrutiny, the kind that made her skin crawl. But then his expression changed. His focus narrowed. "Is that a silver star?" For a moment Maria didn't process the words. The room went still. Forks paused mid-air. Even Dixon, standing across the room, stopped mid-sentence. Maria's hand instinctively went to her uniform, brushing the small ribbon just above her heart. She'd almost forgotten she was wearing her full dress blues. She hadn't meant to. Dixon's orders had come so fast she hadn't changed out of it. "Yes, sir." Her voice came out softer than she intended. The general pushed back his chair and stood, the sound echoing in the silence. "For what action?" Her pulse quickened. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. Even the air felt heavy now. Dixon's glare burned into her back. Maria hesitated. She hadn't spoken about that day in years. "Wardac Province, Afghanistan, sir," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 2019. The general's eyes widened, and something like recognition flashed across his face. He turned to the others at the table. "Gentlemen, this is the soldier I was telling you about." Murmurs rippled through the room. The analyst who held off an enemy assault while coordinating the evacuation of 37 civilians and a special forces team. Maria felt the ground tilt beneath her. She hadn't realized anyone outside her old unit even remembered. That mission had nearly killed her, and most of it was still classified. "You carried a wounded captain 3 clicks through enemy territory," the general continued, his voice rising. "You called in danger-close airstrikes under direct fire. You saved 17 American lives and God knows how many Afghan civilians." He turned fully toward her now, his posture rigid with respect. "And we have you serving coffee." The words hung in the air, slicing through the silence like shrapnel. Dixon's face went pale. No one moved. "Someone," the general said, his voice low but sharp as broken glass, "explain to me why a Silver Star recipient, one of the finest intelligence analysts in this army, is being used as waitstaff at a strategic planning conference where her expertise could actually make a difference." No one dared answer. The silence stretched, long enough for Maria to hear her own heartbeat. "Sergeant Santos," the general said finally, gesturing to an empty chair at the head table, "please sit down. We need your insight on village-level intelligence operations." He glanced around, "And someone else can pour the damn coffee." A nervous laugh flickered somewhere near the back of the room, but died quickly. Maria hesitated. The tray in her hands suddenly felt heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. Her legs trembled as she set it down. Every instinct screamed at her to keep her head down, to stay small. But another voice, quiet, steady, familiar, rose inside her. The same one that had kept her alive in the hills of Wardac. "You've earned your place." She walked toward the head table. Dixon's eyes followed her, cold, furious. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, calculating how this would look on his report. For the first time in months, she didn't care. The general extended his hand as she approached. "General Marcus Webb," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I've read your after-action report, Sergeant. It's an honor to finally meet you." Maria took his hand. The grip was firm, sincere. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once, his expression softening. "And on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize that you've been treated with anything less than the respect you've earned." Something broke inside her then, quietly, invisibly. Not pain, not pride. Something deeper, like the slow release of a weight she'd carried too long. She sat down at the table. The room shifted around her. The generals leaned in, asking questions about her methods, her insights, her experience with local interpreters and cultural networks. She answered each one, calm and precise, her voice steady now. She spoke not as a server, not as a subordinate, but as a soldier. As the conversation flowed, Maria caught her reflection in the polished silver pitcher beside her. The ribbons, the insignia, the faint scars that lined her knuckles. Those weren't decorations. They were evidence, proof that she belonged here. And yet beneath the pride, another emotion stirred, something she couldn't quite name, because recognition, however overdue, didn't erase what had been done. Outside, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, spilling across the table. She watched it trace over her medals, turning the silver star into a mirror of light. For the first time in a long time, Maria Santos didn't feel invisible. But she also knew this moment wasn't about her. It was about every soldier who'd been told to serve when they were meant to lead. The desert doesn't remember your name. That was what she'd learned first. You could fight, bleed, save lives, but by morning the wind erased it all. The sound of rotors still haunted her dreams sometimes. The rhythmic thump that came just before dawn, when the sky over Wardac turned the color of bruised gold. That morning had started quiet, deceptively so. "Movement North Ridge," Corporal Easton had whispered, scanning the horizon through his scope. Maria was crouched beside him on the roof of the abandoned schoolhouse, the morning chill biting through her fatigues. She adjusted the tablet on her lap, data feeds flickering across the screen, signal intercepts, movement patterns, village transmissions. Her job wasn't to shoot. It was to see, to make sense of chaos before it reached them. "Copy that," she murmured. "Confirm if it's local or hostile." Easton squinted. Too organized for local herders, could be scouting party. Maria frowned. She'd been analyzing comms chatter all week, something about an upcoming strike, a promise of revenge after an American convoy passed through the valley. She flagged it in her report, urged command to move the evac earlier. The request had been denied. Insufficient confirmation, they'd said. Now that denial had a face. A formation of armed men threading through the rocky ridgeline like shadows. She switched to the secure comms channel. "Command, this is Analyst Santos at Bravo Outpost. We have visual confirmation of armed movement approaching from the North Ridge. Estimated 30 plus, possibly more behind cover." Static, then a voice she recognized, Lieutenant Carter, her field lead. "Copy, Santos. We're prepping for evac. Hold position and maintain eyes." "Sir, recommend immediate extraction of civilians from the lower compound. If they breach the ridge, we'll be cut off." "Negative, Sergeant. That order comes from higher up." She clenched her jaw. "Sir." "Hold your position." The comms clicked off. She stared at the horizon, at the dust cloud now forming behind the ridge. She didn't need satellite data to know what was coming. Wardac's silence was deceptive like that. It always came before hell. Down below in the courtyard, children were playing beside the well, local civilians the U.S. had been protecting, families caught between insurgents and survival. Maria's chest tightened. They had no idea what was closing in. She dropped from the roof and sprinted toward the operations tent. The compound was small, a collection of mud walls and canvas stretched thin against a sky too wide for mercy. Inside, Captain Reynolds was bent over a map, barking orders. "Sir," Maria said, breathless, "they're coming down fast. We need to move those civilians." "I heard your report, Santos. The bird's 20 minutes out. We'll hold until then." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that 20 minutes in Wardac was the difference between life and death. But before she could speak, the first explosion ripped through the valley. The ground shook, dust and screams filled the air. "Contact," someone yelled from the perimeter. Reynolds grabbed his rifle. "Positions, get those civilians to cover." Maria's instincts kicked in. She bolted back outside, shouting orders. "Get the kids inside the main building. Easton, take the north wall, suppressing fire only." Bullets tore through the courtyard, chipping stone and kicking up dirt. Maria ducked behind a Humvee, her ears ringing. She'd been in firefights before, but this felt different, too close, too sudden, too many of them. Through the haze, she spotted movement on the ridge, flashlights, glints of steel, coordinated fire. They weren't a disorganized militia. They were trained. She tapped her comms again. Command, we are under heavy fire. I repeat, heavy fire. Civilians on site. Request immediate close air support. Negative, Santos, came the reply. We can't authorize danger-close strikes without visual confirmation of enemy density. She almost laughed. You want confirmation? Step outside. Static, no response. The next rounds hit closer. A Humvee erupted in flame. She could hear the civilians crying from inside the schoolhouse. And then a scream. She turned. Captain Reynolds was down, hit in the shoulder, blood soaking through his uniform. Maria sprinted through the open courtyard, bullets snapping past her ears. She reached him, grabbed his vest, and dragged him behind cover. Stay with me, sir, she said, pressing a bandage to the wound. Reynolds groaned, gripping her wrist. They're cutting us off. Not yet, they're not. She keyed her radio again. Bravo Command, this is Sergeant Santos. Captain Reynolds is down. We are pinned. Civilians in the open. Request permission for immediate strike on North Ridge Grid 34 Alpha. Still silence. Her mind raced. If she waited for authorization, they'd all die here. Her gaze swept to the children, faces streaked with tears, clutching each other behind shattered windows. She made a promise when she took the uniform. Protect the innocent, no matter the cost. She took a breath, switched to the air support channel, and gave the coordinates herself. This is Sergeant Maria Santos, ID number 4875. I am authorizing danger close strike on Grid 34 Alpha. Immediate fire mission. The reply came seconds later, a calm voice from the sky. Copy, Sergeant, cleared hot. She closed her eyes as the world erupted. The ridge vanished in a wave of dust and fire. The shockwave threw her backward. When the air cleared, the gunfire had thinned. The ridge was silent again. Maria staggered to her feet. Her ears rang. She could taste blood, but the civilians were alive. Easton's team was regrouping. Then she saw the smoke rising from the north perimeter, enemy vehicles, more than before. It wasn't over. She turned to Reynolds, who was barely conscious. We need to move, now. He tried to stand, faltered. She slung his arm over her shoulders and began dragging him toward the evac zone. Her muscles screamed with every step, but she didn't stop. 3 kilometers of open terrain stood between them and extraction. The sun was a burning coin overhead. Every breath scraped her lungs. Behind them, gunfire echoed again. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her only focus was forward, one step then another. The radio crackled. Evac bird inbound, smoke for signal. Maria fumbled for a flare and fired it into the sky. Red smoke bloomed above the valley. The helicopter appeared like a salvation, blades chopping the air. Soldiers waved from the door. Come on, sir, stay with me. They stumbled through the final stretch as bullets chased them through the dust. When they reached the chopper, Maria shoved Reynolds aboard and turned to cover their retreat. The gunner opened fire, sweeping the hillside. Maria climbed in last, gripping the edge of the ramp as they lifted off. Below her, Wardac burned in silence. She didn't speak for the entire flight. Reynolds lay beside her, pale but alive. Easton gave her a thumbs-up across the cabin, his eyes wide with disbelief. When they landed at the forward base, medics rushed Reynolds away. A colonel she didn't know pulled her aside. Sergeant, you disobeyed a direct order. She stood there covered in dust, sweat, and blood. Yes, sir. He studied her for a long moment. You also saved 37 civilians and a full Special Forces team. She said nothing. He nodded once. We'll review your actions. That was all. No praise, no ceremony, just paperwork. But that night, as she sat alone outside the tent, the desert wind brushing against her face, she felt something shift. She wasn't proud exactly, just certain. She made the right call, even if no one ever said it aloud. Years later, sitting in that officer's dining hall, the smell of coffee and polish filling her lungs, Maria realized the general had known that day's silence. He'd been one of the men in the operations command chain, the one who'd signed off on the Silver Star citation she never expected to see again. He remembered her, even when the desert hadn't. And that somehow meant more than any medal. Outside the tall windows, the sky was clear blue again, too peaceful, almost cruelly so. Maria's reflection looked back at her from the glass, the same woman who had walked through fire and sand, but now sitting among generals instead of crouching under gunfire. Recognition didn't heal old wounds, but it reminded her of one truth she'd almost forgotten. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it survives. Why did silence feel louder than applause? The meeting had ended hours ago, but its echoes still lingered in Maria's chest like the aftershock of an explosion. The generals had left the hall one by one, murmuring their farewells to General Webb, nodding politely to her as they passed. Some looked curious, others embarrassed. None of them seemed to know what to say. She didn't blame them. They just learned that the woman who'd poured their coffee had once called airstrikes on a mountainside. Now the dining hall was empty, except for the clink of silverware being cleared away and the faint hum of the overhead lights. The smell of roast and coffee still hung in the air. Maria sat where Webb had told her to sit at the head table. Her posture was perfect, hands folded, eyes distant. The silver star caught the light every time she breathed. "You handled that well," a voice said behind her. She turned. General Webb stood near the door, cap tucked under one arm, expression thoughtful. His tone was softer now, less commanding, more human. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You looked like you wanted to disappear when I called you out." She gave a small shrug. "Old habits, sir." Webb nodded. "They die hard." He leaned on the back of a chair. "You know, I still remember reading that report. We lost contact for almost 20 hours. The extraction team thought no one survived. Then your transmission came through, coordinates, casualty count, evac request, all calm, all precise." She looked down. "I was anything but calm." "That's what makes it remarkable." For a while neither of them spoke. Outside, the daylight was beginning to fade. Long shadows stretched across the polished floor, reaching toward the table where she sat. "I should thank you," Webb said finally. "You saved a lot of people that day, including one of my junior captains. He never forgot it." Maria's throat tightened. "Captain Reynolds." Webb nodded. "He's training officers now, retired from field duty. He still tells that story, though he leaves out your name." "That's how it should be," she said softly. Webb smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're too humble for this institution, Sergeant." He placed his cap on the table. "Listen, I'm recommending your reassignment to strategic intelligence. You deserve a seat at the table, not a tray in your hands." Maria blinked. "Sir." "It's not a favor," he interrupted gently. "It's a correction." She nodded, unsure what to say. He straightened his uniform, preparing to leave. "Captain Dixon will be spoken to." The words sent a flicker of something sharp through her, not satisfaction, not quite relief, maybe something closer to justice, but it was tainted with unease. She didn't want revenge. She wanted respect to come from understanding, not punishment. When Webb left, the room felt colder. She sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Its surface was smooth, mirror still, until her reflection rippled with a tremor she hadn't realized ran through her hands. 12 years of service, 2 deployments, a medal she never asked for, and still it had taken one man's recognition to make her visible again. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. The barracks were quiet when she returned that night. A soft hum of distant conversation filtered through the hall, the scent of detergent and metal lockers grounding her back into routine. She sat on her bunk, pulled off her boots and stared at the scuffed toes. Each mark had a story. Afghanistan, Kuwait, training drills, endless marches. And now coffee service. She exhaled slowly. The rhythm of military life was supposed to protect you from doubt, from self-reflection. But tonight, doubt felt heavier than her rucksack ever had. Her tablet buzzed on the nightstand. A message. From Cap Dixon. Subject debrief. 600 hours, my office. Of course. Maria stared at the screen for a moment before locking it. She didn't reply. Morning came too early. She woke before dawn, as she always did, long before the base stirred to life. The habit had outlasted deployment, the need to see the world in its quietest form, when nothing demanded anything of her. Outside, the air was crisp. She could hear the faraway whine of engines warming up on the flight line. The horizon glowed faintly pink. She jogged the perimeter once, letting her thoughts unravel with each step. She'd expected pride after yesterday, maybe vindication. Instead, she felt exposed, as if someone had peeled away the armor she'd built to survive the bureaucracy. Recognition was a spotlight, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stand in it. By 600, she was outside Dixon's office. The door was half closed. She knocked once. Enter. He was already at his desk, coffee steaming beside a stack of papers. His face was unreadable, practiced calm. Sit. She sat. He didn't look up for a moment, just turned a page. You made quite an impression yesterday. She said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. General Webb was very vocal in his praise. He also suggested I apologize. Still, she said nothing. Dixon sighed. Let be clear, Sergeant. What happened yesterday doesn't change the chain of command. I understand, sir. But it does complicate things. He gave a thin smile. You embarrassed me in front of senior command. Maria met his eyes. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't matter, Sergeant. Optics do. She held his gaze. With respect, sir, optics didn't save those people in Wardac. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The air tightened. For a moment, Dixon said nothing. Then he leaned forward. You're lucky Webb likes you. Otherwise, I'd be writing a very different report right now. She felt heat rise in her chest but forced her voice to stay even. Permission to speak freely, sir. He raised an eyebrow. Granted. You can write whatever report you want. But the next time you need someone to stand between civilians and a gunfight, I hope you find another server. The silence stretched. Dixon's jaw clenched. But there was something else behind his anger, a flicker of recognition, maybe even guilt. Dismissed, he said finally. She stood, saluted, and walked out. Outside, the hallway light washed over her uniform. The silver star glinted again. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide it. That afternoon, she was called to the strategy wing, not as a server this time, but as a participant. General Webb was there, along with two analysts she didn't recognize. Maps covered the walls. The conversation was technical, tense troop movements, insurgent patterns, shifting loyalties in border regions. Webb motioned her over. Sergeant Santos, based on your field experience, what's your read on the intel from these villages? She stepped closer, eyes scanning the data. Old instincts stirred awake, a pattern recognition, cross-analysis, human behavior. She traced her finger along a route on the map. They're funneling resources through neutral villages. Not direct insurgent control, but cooperation under pressure. If you move troops here, she tapped a valley line, you'll create a humanitarian crisis before you root out any threat. One of the analysts frowned. Then what's the alternative? Local partnerships, language-capable units. Civilians do betray you if they believe you see them. Webb nodded slowly, spoken like someone who's lived it. She didn't respond, but her mind flickered back to Wardac. The children, the dust, the explosion that stole her hearing for a week. When the meeting ended, Webb stopped her at the door. "You were right about optics," he said. "They fade, results don't." She smiled faintly. "Permission to return to duty, sir." He nodded. "Not duty, Sergeant, purpose." That night Maria sat outside the barracks under the pale wash of moonlight. The air smelled faintly of fuel and earth. In the distance, the rhythmic thump of helicopters began again, the same sound that once meant survival, escape, loss. She closed her eyes. Wardac's ghosts were quieter now, but they hadn't vanished. Maybe they never would. Recognition hadn't erased what she'd endured, but it had reframed it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond endurance. Maybe teaching younger analysts. Maybe building bridges instead of just surviving them. The military wasn't kind to humility, but she'd learned that real strength didn't need to announce itself. It just needed to keep showing up. A soft wind stirred. She lifted her eyes to the sky, endless, unblinking. She didn't whisper a prayer. She didn't salute the stars. She just breathed. And somewhere deep inside, a voice that had once screamed to be heard finally went quiet, not because it was silenced, but because it was understood. Why did the quiet rooms feel more dangerous than the battlefields ever had? Maria had asked herself that question every morning since her reassignment. The Strategic Intelligence Division wasn't what she'd imagined. There were no shouting officers or tents pitched in dust, no smell of cordite or sweat, just clean corridors that smelled faintly of disinfectant and polished glass. People here fought wars with data. Their weapons were briefings and screens, their armor distance. Maria walked those halls like a ghost in daylight. The younger analysts looked up when she passed, some in awe, some with the curiosity reserved for rumor. They'd read her file or parts of it. The word Silver Star carried its own gravity, but it also created distance. People respected her, but they didn't approach. She didn't mind, not really. Silence was familiar. "Morning, Sergeant." Lieutenant Harris, one of the junior intel officers, offered a polite nod as she entered the operations center. Rows of monitors glowed in the dim room, each screen a different slice of the world. Satellite feeds, intercepted transmissions, threat maps blooming like neural networks. "Morning," Maria replied, setting her coffee down beside her terminal. General Webb's initiative had worked quickly. Within a week of the dining hall incident, she'd been reassigned under his command to lead a review unit focused on localized intelligence integrity. A sanitized way of saying, find what we've missed before it kills someone. She spent hours reading after-action reports, watching drone footage, cross-referencing field logs against human intel summaries. She saw the gaps no one else saw, the places where assumptions turned fatal. But what unsettled her wasn't the workload. It was the way people spoke in absolutes here, as if maps told the whole story, as if war could be clean when you were far enough away. "Sergeant," Harris's voice broke through her thoughts. "Command wants your review on the Nasir report by 1400. She nodded, on it. As he walked away, she opened the file, a summary of a raid on a suspected weapons cache near Kandahar. The language was clinical, stripped of humanity, collateral minimal, objective secured, area neutralized. But one line caught her eye. Human intelligence source compromised, status unknown. She leaned back. That phrase, status unknown, was bureaucratic camouflage. It meant we lost someone. She pulled up the cross report. A name appeared, Farid Rahman, local interpreter. Her chest tightened. She remembered that name. Wardac again. The same network of interpreters who'd helped them build trust in villages long before the ambush. Farid had been one of the good ones, loyal, careful, and brave. She scrolled through the rest of the file, her pulse quickening. According to the timestamps, Farid's last transmission had come hours before the raid. He'd reported movement, not insurgents, but villagers evacuating in panic after hearing American troops were coming. Then nothing. No extraction, no mention of his name afterward. She exhaled slowly. "You left him," she whispered under her breath. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She could flag the report for review. She could recommend an internal investigation. But she already knew what would happen. It would vanish into a sea of paperwork, reclassified, buried. "Everything okay, Sergeant?" She looked up. Harris was watching her from across the room. "Fine," she said, "just verifying data continuity." He nodded, unconvinced, and walked away. Maria's reflection stared back at her from the monitor. The eyes were the same ones that had watched Wardac burn, eyes that still remembered the sound of children crying under shellfire. She tapped her pen against the desk, thinking. War didn't end when the shooting stopped. It just moved into cleaner rooms. That night, she stayed late after everyone else had gone. The building was dark except for the hum of servers and the faint glow from the screens. She reopened the Nasir report. Her fingers hesitated, then began typing, a quiet rebellion masked as analysis. Possible error in human chain of custody. Recommend reevaluation of civilian impact assessment. She attached a cross-reference file, Farid's last transmission, and encrypted the note under her clearance key. It wasn't an accusation. It was a signal flare buried in bureaucracy. If anyone cared to look, they'd find him. She sat back, rubbing her eyes. The air in the room felt too still, too sterile. For the first time since her reassignment, she missed the dust. She missed knowing who the enemy was. Here the lines were blurred, the damage invisible. She gathered her things and left, her boots echoing down the corridor. 2 days later, Webb called her into his office. He was sitting behind a desk littered with maps and manila folders, the air faintly smelling of tobacco. "Sergeant Santos," he said, motioning for her to sit, "you've been busy." "Sorry." He slid a folder toward her, her note, her encrypted addendum. "I reviewed your audit. That was bold." She met his eyes. "Sir, the data didn't add up, the source." "Farid Rahman," he nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember him. You worked with his family in Wardac." Her chest tightened. "Then you know he was trustworthy. He shouldn't have been written off." Webb exhaled. "You're right, but what you did, that kind of annotation raises attention at higher levels. Not everyone appreciates questions that lead to uncomfortable answers." "I didn't do it for appreciation." "I know." He leaned forward, voice lower now. "But this is the kind of thing that can make enemies in quiet offices. You understand?" She nodded once. He studied her for a moment. "You've got 2 choices, Sergeant. Keep digging carefully or play it safe and let it go." Maria's response came without hesitation. "I didn't survive Wardac to start lying now, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's what I thought you'd say." He closed the file. "Proceed, but quietly. You'll have my cover for now." She saluted. "Understood, sir." As she left his office, her pulse raced with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not fear, purpose. For the first time since Wardac, she wasn't just enduring the system, she was testing it. The deeper she dug, the more the pattern emerged. Reports overwritten, local allies disappeared, strike logs edited post-action. Somewhere between data and decision, truth was being erased. She wasn't sure when it had started, but she knew what it meant. People were dying off the record. Late one night, while combing through archived transmissions, she found something she wasn't supposed to see, a recorded message from Farid himself. Audio only. Static, then his voice. "If anyone receives this, please tell Sergeant Santos. They know I worked with her. They are coming for my family." The recording cut abruptly. Timestamp 12 hours before the raid. Her heart clenched. She leaned back, the room spinning faintly. She hadn't realized how much of herself she'd buried with Wardac, and now the dead were speaking again. She saved the file under a new encryption key, hidden beneath layers of operational metadata. She didn't trust the system to protect it, or her. Days blurred together. Meetings, reports, subtle looks from other analysts who sensed she was digging too deep. Harris avoided her now, maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of fear. At night, she couldn't sleep. The whir of ceiling fans became rotor blades in her head. The shadows on the wall became the ridge at Wardac. She'd been through firefights, airstrikes, and extraction under fire, but nothing felt as suffocating as fighting a war no one admitted existed. A week later, Webb called her again. His tone was different this time, tense, clipped. Sergeant closed the door. She did. He handed her a sealed folder. This is above my clearance now. The report you flagged made it to Central Command. They've opened a review. That's good, isn't it? Depends who's reviewing. He paused, eyes heavy. They'll question your access, your motives. You're walking a fine line between analyst and whistleblower. Maria straightened. I'm just doing my job, sir. Webb gave a sad smile. That's exactly what scares them. He stood, coming around the desk. You're not wrong, Santos. You never were, but remember, the system protects itself first. Always. She nodded, but inside, something hard and unyielding had already taken root. For too long, she'd stayed silent to survive. Now silence was complicity. As she left the office, she felt the same wind she'd felt on that Afghan ridgeline, invisible but relentless. Some battles happened once, others followed you home. That night, as rain pattered softly against the window, Maria replayed Farid's recording one last time. The static filled her small quarters like ghosts, whispering in another language. Then softly, she said to the empty room, I'm not letting them erase you too. Outside, lightning flashed, silent, brief, brilliant. She opened a new report, began typing. Her words were steady, deliberate, unafraid. Because some medals weren't given for valor. Some were earned by telling the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. Why was everyone suddenly careful around her? Maria noticed it first in the way conversation stopped when she entered the room. The subtle pauses, the glances exchanged between analysts, the screens that minimized a little too quickly. In the war zones, she had learned to sense danger before it arrived, a shift in the wind, a silence too deep. Here, it was bureaucracy that carried the same scent of warning. She sat at her terminal, eyes fixed on the latest intelligence updates, pretending not to notice. The hum of the servers was constant, the light from the monitors pale and cold. To anyone watching, she was just another analyst working through another endless set of coordinates and coded transmissions. But inside, every muscle in her body was tense. The file she'd sent, the one about Farid, had gone beyond General Webb's reach now. She knew that much. There had been no official reprimand yet, but the atmosphere had changed. Respect had turned into distance, deference into avoidance. Harris barely met her eyes anymore. The few colleagues who used to eat lunch with her now found reasons not to. Even the young tech specialist who'd once asked her about Wardac stopped saying good morning. Maria didn't take it personally. She took it as confirmation. Someone knew she'd been digging. She scrolled through the open report in front of her, the screen reflecting off her medals, small reminders of a truth too heavy to wear. She'd already learned once that bravery didn't always look like charging a ridge. Sometimes it looked like sitting alone at a desk while the system quietly turned against you. Her door access light flickered green to red, then back to green. A glitch maybe, but it made her pause. She saved her work and shut down her screen. Sergeant Santos, a voice called from behind. She turned to see Colonel Avery, one of the senior intelligence officers standing near the doorway. His smile was tight, controlled. "Colonel," she said, standing. "Walk with me." She followed him down the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. "I've been reading some of your reports," he said. "Impressive work, very thorough." "Thank you, sir." "Almost too thorough." The words were soft, but they landed like a blade. Maria didn't respond. He glanced sideways at her. "I appreciate initiative, Sergeant, but you've been crossing into files that don't concern your assignment. Farid Rahman, civilian impact assessments, unauthorized access technically." "I'm verifying incomplete data chains, sir. That's part of my directive." "Within reason." They stopped outside a conference room. Avery turned to face her, lowering his voice. "Off the record, Sergeant, there are parts of this job that don't survive too much scrutiny. You understand?" Her pulse quickened. "With respect, sir, I don't believe truth should be classified by convenience." His eyes hardened. "Be careful, Santos. You've already made powerful friends. Don't start making enemies to match them." Then he left her standing in the hall, the echo of his boots fading into silence. She didn't move for a long time. That night, Webb called. His tone was strained, quieter than usual. "You spoke with Avery?" "Yes, sir." He exhaled heavily. "He's on the oversight board. He's not happy." "I gathered that." A pause. "Listen, Maria, I can't protect you if this goes further. They'll frame it as a breach of protocol, misuse of classified data, anything they can to discredit you." "Sir, he left people behind. He doctored reports." "I know." Webb's voice was tight with frustration. "But knowing and proving aren't the same thing." Her silence stretched across the line. "You have to ask yourself," he continued, "how far you're willing to go, because once you pull this thread, there's no stopping it." Maria looked around her quarters, bare walls, neatly folded uniform, a medal glinting faintly under the desk lamp. She remembered the children in Wardac, the screams, the dust, Farid's voice crackling through static, asking her to protect his family. She didn't hesitate. "Then I pull it all the way." The next morning she arrived early. The building was nearly empty, the air still heavy with the night's silence. She accessed the secure archive again, this time tracing not just Farid's case, but the communications chain above it. Each file led to another, each name to a new clearance level. She found discrepancies in timestamps, directives signed hours before field reports were even submitted. Someone wasn't just covering up mistakes. Someone was rewriting history. She began printing key logs, encrypting copies to an external drive under her clearance code. Every sound, every printer whir, every hallway footstep made her heart pound harder. By mid-morning, the floor was buzzing with routine again. No one seemed to notice her, and that was both a relief and a warning. At noon, a security officer appeared at her desk. "Sergeant Santos." She looked up. "General Webb wants to see you, now." Webb's office felt colder than usual. He stood behind his desk, expression unreadable. The blinds were half closed, the light slicing the room into narrow bands. "Sit," he said. She sat. He slid a document across the table, her access log from the archives. "They're reviewing this." Someone tipped Avery off. Maria felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Sir, I was doing my job." "I know that." Webb rubbed his temple. "But it doesn't matter. They've initiated an internal audit." "On me." "On your activity, yes. But make no mistake, this is personal now." She sat straighter. "Are they trying to shut down the investigation?" "They're trying to shut you down." Webb looked at her for a long moment, his voice softening. "Maria, there's something I've learned in all my years wearing this uniform. The Army loves heroes, but only the kind it can control." She met his eyes. "And what happens to the ones it ca?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. That evening, as the sun sank over the base, Maria walked the perimeter road alone. The air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere far off, an aircraft lifted into the sky, its engines fatting into the clouds. She thought about Wardac again, about how fear felt there. It was physical, immediate, honest. Here it was subtle, hidden in emails and polite smiles. She preferred the bullets, at least they didn't lie. She stopped by the fence line, staring out toward the empty horizon. The world beyond was vast, unknowable, but the thought that haunted her wasn't the danger outside. It was what was being buried inside. 2 days later, Webb was called to headquarters for evaluation. By the next morning, his nameplate was gone from the door. Maria asked no questions. The answers were obvious. She spent the next week under observation, her work reviewed, her communications logged. Every file request was delayed, every clearance rechecked. Still, she kept working. She knew the risk now, but she also knew what inaction looked like. She'd seen it in the faces of those left behind. And then, late one night, an anonymous message appeared on her terminal. Subject: he didn't make it out. Attachment: audio file, 0112 Farid post. Her pulse spiked. She played it. Static, then Farid's voice, faint and fragmented. They know I helped you. My family is gone. If this reaches you, don't stop. They'll pretend I never existed. Don't let them. The recording cut off. Maria stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she went straight to Colonel Avery's office. He looked up, clearly annoyed. "Sergeant, I don't recall scheduling." "You knew," she said, her voice low but steady. "About Farid, about the civilians your raid killed. You erased the report." His expression didn't change. "Watch your tone." "Sir, I have the transmissions," his last words. He leaned back, studying her. "Careful, Sergeant. Allegations like that could end your career." She took a step closer. "Then so be it." Avery's smile was faint, cruel. "Do you really think anyone will believe you over command? You're a non-commissioned officer with a record of insubordination and trauma exposure. You're a liability waiting for validation." Her jaw tightened. "I think the truth believes me, sir." They stared at each other for a long moment, the kind of silence that could collapse careers. Then she turned and walked out. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at her uniform laid out on the bed. The medals gleamed faintly in the low light, proof of battles fought, won, survived. But they couldn't shield her from what was coming. Her drive, her notes, the recordings, she packed them into a single encrypted file. Then she uploaded it to a secure, external channel, not military, not government, civil oversight. If they were going to bury the truth, she'd make sure it was buried somewhere the world could dig it up again. Her hands trembled slightly as she hit send. The file transferred. Complete. She sat back, exhaling slowly. No explosions, no alarms, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before everything changes. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Maria looked out the window at the rain starting to fall, heavy, cold, cleansing. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Suspension, discharge, maybe worse. But for the first time since Wardac, she wasn't afraid. Because courage didn't always survive on the battlefield. Sometimes it waited until you were completely alone. They didn't come for her right away. That was almost worse. For 3 days, nothing happened. No calls, no emails, no sudden knock at the door. Maria went to work like everything was normal, or as normal as life could be when every second felt borrowed. The silence was a kind of psychological warfare. The army didn't shout when it wanted to crush you. It just waited for you to start breaking yourself. Maria moved through her routine with mechanical precision: wake before dawn, run the perimeter, shower, uniform, coffee, desk. The same motions she'd lived for 12 years. Except now, the air was charged with something unseen. Her badge still worked at the gate. Her login still granted access. But the moment she entered the Strategic Intelligence Center, she could feel the weight of eyes on her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed. Emails arrived late, requests denied without explanation. Even Harris, who once treated her with cautious respect, couldn't meet her gaze anymore. The report she'd uploaded to the Civilian Oversight Channel had vanished from her sent folder. The confirmation receipt gone. For a moment, she wondered if it had even gone through. And then one morning, her computer screen flashed blue. Access revoked. Please contact your administrator. There it was. The first cut. She sat still for a long time, watching the cursor blink against the blank screen. She'd expected this, just not so soon. Sergeant Santos, a voice said behind her. She turned. 2 security officers stood by her desk. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces unreadable. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." No explanation, no accusation, just procedure. Maria rose slowly, smoothing her uniform. "Am I being detained?" "Standard review protocol, ma'am." She nodded. "Then let's review." They escorted her down the corridor to an interview room, small, windowless, humming with fluorescent light. The table was bare except for a recorder. An unfamiliar officer entered, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Civil Affairs Division. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sergeant Santos, appreciate your cooperation." She said nothing. He pressed a button on the recorder. "This is an informal administrative inquiry regarding a breach of data protocol. You understand this conversation is being recorded?" "Yes, sir." He opened a folder. "You accessed restricted archives outside your clearance scope. You distributed encrypted data to an unauthorized external network." "I submitted corroborative evidence to oversight," she corrected. He looked up. "That's one way to phrase it." Maria leaned back slightly. "What's the other way?" "Unauthorized disclosure of classified material. Potential violation of the Espionage Act." She felt a flicker of cold in her chest but didn't flinch. "You're accusing me of espionage for reporting falsified field data." "I'm not accusing," he said calmly. "I'm documenting." "Then document this," she said, her voice steady. "Those falsified reports cost civilian lives. A local interpreter named Farid Rahman was executed because someone here doctored after-action logs to hide it." Hayes tapped his pen. "Do you have proof?" She hesitated. "The recordings, the metadata trail, you already have them." He smiled faintly. "You mean the files that mysteriously appeared on a civilian server before being removed for national security reasons. So they did go through." His expression hardened. "You've put sensitive intelligence into public channels, Sergeant. That's not whistleblowing, that's recklessness." Maria's eyes narrowed. "Truth isn't sensitive, sir. Only lies are." For the first time, his polite mask cracked. He turned off the recorder. "Let me give you some advice off the record, Sergeant. You're not a hero here. You're a liability. People like you, decorated, outspoken, difficult to control, don't last long in this environment. They'll make you disappear with paperwork." "I've disappeared before," she said quietly. "In Wardac, we called it survival." Hayes stood collecting his files. "You've got 24 hours to report to administrative hold. Effective immediately, your clearance is suspended." "Under whose authority?" He paused at the door. "Colonel Avery." "Of course." When he left, the silence in the room was absolute. That night Maria sat alone in her quarters, the overhead light flickering faintly. Her personal tablet was gone, confiscated. Her communications line cut off. She had nothing left except her uniform and the weight of what she'd done. For a long time she just sat there, listening to the bass around her, footsteps in the hall, the low murmur of distant engines, the hum of power lines. Everything continued like nothing had changed. But everything had. She'd been erased in real time. The next morning, she reported to administrative hold. It wasn't a cell, not exactly. More like a waiting room with locks. She was assigned a temporary ID, limited access to the mess hall, and no external contact. Days blurred together. She wasn't questioned again. No one told her what was happening. But she knew the pattern. Delay, starve, forget. It was the same tactic she'd seen insurgents use against prisoners, isolation through routine. Break the will without lifting a hand. At night, she replayed Farid's voice in her head, every word etched into memory. Don't let them erase me. She wouldn't, even if they erased her first. On the 5th day, she got a visitor. The guard opened the door. You have 10 minutes. Webb stepped inside. He looked older, exhaustion carved into his features. His uniform was unbuttoned at the collar. Sir, she said quietly. Don't salute, he muttered. They're watching. He sat across from her, lowering his voice. They're preparing charges. Data breach, misconduct, possible insubordination. She nodded, expected as much. I tried to intervene, they shut me out. He hesitated. You made powerful enemies, Maria. Truth tends to do that. Webb smiled weakly. You sound like me 20 years ago. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. Listen carefully. I don't know how much longer I'll be in uniform, but I pulled one favor. There's a civilian journalist who's been following these cover-up trails for months. If your file reaches her, the story won't die. Maria frowned, but I have no access left, no comms, no data. Webb's eyes flicked toward the guard outside. Then you'll have to remember it. She blinked, sir. He tapped his temple lightly. The coordinates, the mission codes, the dates, it's all in your head, isn't it? Maria hesitated, then nodded slowly. Good, Webb said. Then they can take everything from you except that. He stood to leave. Hold on a little longer. The truth moves slow, but it moves. She swallowed hard. Thank you, sir. He looked back once before stepping out. For what it's worth, Sergeant, I've never been prouder of anyone under my command. The door closed behind him. And for the first time in days, Maria allowed herself a small, fragile breath of relief. 2 weeks passed, then 3. And then, one night, she woke to the sound of boots outside her door. Sergeant Santos, on your feet. Her pulse quickened. 2 MPs entered. You're being transferred. To where? Headquarters, you'll be briefed there. She packed quickly, not that there was much to take. The drive was long and silent. Through the window, she saw nothing but darkness, the road stretching endlessly ahead. When they arrived, she was escorted into another room, empty again, white walls, 1 chair. And then Colonel Avery entered. No smile this time. Sergeant, he said flatly, you've been relieved of duty effective immediately. You'll receive a formal notice of separation within 72 hours. Maria stared at him. For what? Failure to adhere to chain of command, mishandling of classified data, conduct unbecoming. She almost laughed. Unbecoming, you mean inconvenient. His jaw tightened. You could have had a long, quiet career, but you had to make it complicated. I didn't make it complicated, she said evenly. You made it dirty. Avery stepped closer, lowering his voice. The Army doesn't care what you think. When you're gone, no one will remember your name. You'll just be another ghost file in a system full of them. Maria met his gaze, calm and unflinching. Then I'll haunt it. They stared at each other, the architect of silence and the soldier who refused it. Finally, he turned and left. That night, in a small temporary room with no insignia, no uniform, and no purpose left on paper, Maria wrote her final report. It wasn't for the Army. It wasn't even for history. It was for herself. She wrote everything she remembered: coordinates, dates, conversations, names. Every buried truth she'd carried since Wardac. Every face the reports had turned into collateral. By dawn, the pages filled the desk. She folded them neatly into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote one line across the front: "For those who served with silence." Then she slid it under the door. The next morning she walked out of headquarters in civilian clothes. Her ID no longer worked. Her rank, her access, her career, gone. But as she stepped into the sunlight, she felt something she hadn't in years. Weightless. The institution had taken everything they could, but they couldn't take her truth. As the wind carried dust across the pavement, she whispered softly, "You're not erased, Farid." And in that moment, she believed it. That evening, miles away, a small anonymous file landed in a journalist's inbox. No name, no sender, just a timestamp and a note. Some metals shine brightest in silence. The attachment was encrypted. Inside were coordinates, logs, voice recordings, and a story that would soon shake the very walls that had tried to bury it. Freedom didn't sound the way she thought it would. It wasn't a cheer or a sigh or a door slamming behind her. It was silence. The kind that felt too big for one person to stand in. Maria Santos stepped off the base for the last time, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her uniform neatly folded inside. Civilians passed her without a second glance. The gates closed behind her with a mechanical hiss, final, indifferent. 12 years of service, gone with the swipe of a badge. She thought she'd feel anger, maybe even pride, but all she felt was the wind, cold, empty. She walked until the base was out of sight, until the air smelled like rain instead of metal. There was no destination, just distance. At a gas station off the highway, she stopped for coffee. The clerk barely looked up. The TV in the corner droned on about markets, politics, weather, everything except war. She wondered if anyone here even knew what Wardac was. She doubted it. And maybe that was the point. Weeks passed. She found a small apartment in Arlington, one bedroom, barely furnished. The walls were thin, the neighbors quiet. It suited her. The Army had deposited her final paycheck. Her benefits were pending review. She knew better than to expect them quickly. Every morning she still woke before dawn, ran the block, made coffee, checked the news. Habit was harder to kill than duty. But her new life had a strange stillness to it, like the silence after a firefight when your ears are ringing, and you can't tell if you survived. She filed appeals against her discharge. No response. She tried to reach Webb. His number was disconnected. Rumor said he'd retired early. She didn't ask where he'd gone. Some people disappeared into comfort, others into consequence. Sometimes she caught herself touching the spot on her chest where the silver star used to rest. It wasn't there anymore. She'd left it behind. She didn't deserve to wear it, she thought. Not when so many names never got written on medals. Then one morning, she saw the headline: Civilian CASULTIS in Kandahar raid. New documents reveal cover-up. Maria froze mid-step, her coffee cooling in her hand. The article came from the Sentinel, a small but fiercely independent investigative paper. No bylines she recognized, just facts, brutal, unadorned. It detailed falsified after-action reports, missing field logs, misattributed drone strikes. The story traced it all back to the Nasir operation, and to a single internal analysis that had exposed the discrepancies. Her analysis. They didn't name her, but the phrasing, the metadata, the cross-referenced language, it was hers. Her pulse quickened. The truth had survived. She read the article 3 times. Then she read the comments, not because she expected understanding, but because she needed to know how the world saw it. Some people were outraged, others called it propaganda, some blamed the army, Others blamed her, whoever her was. But buried deep in the thread, one comment stood out. Farid was my cousin. We thought no one cared, thank you. Maria stared at it until her vision blurred. Then she closed the laptop. And for the first time in months, she cried. The story spread slowly at first, then gained momentum. Major networks picked it up. Politicians called for investigations. Command spokespeople denied any intentional wrongdoing. The usual dance. But something was different this time. For the first time in years, the public was paying attention. The words accountability and collateral damage appeared in the same sentence. People were asking the questions Maria had once whispered into silence. Her name was never mentioned, but she didn't care. This was never about being seen. It was about making sure others couldn't be erased. One night, she received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: thank you for not staying silent. Attachment: no file. Inside was a single line. They're reopening the Wardac file. Her breath caught. She stared at the screen for a long moment, the glow of it reflected in her eyes. Wardac. The place that had made her, the place that had broken her, the ghost she'd carried through every corridor, every battle, every briefing. If they reopened the case, really reopened it, maybe those ghosts would finally rest. But truth had a way of resurfacing with teeth. A week later, someone knocked on her door. It was late, nearly midnight. The sound made her pulse jump. She approached carefully, peering through the peephole. A woman stood outside, early 30s, rain-soaked and nervous. Civilian clothes, messenger bag slung across her shoulder. Ms. Santos. Maria hesitated, then opened the door a crack. Yes. I'm Lena Ortiz, the Sentinel. I wrote the Kandahar piece. Maria's stomach tightened. How did you find me? Lena smiled faintly. You're good at hiding, but someone wanted you found. Webb. A pause, then a nod. He said you'd understand. Maria stepped aside, motioning her in. You'd better come inside. They sat at the small kitchen table, two steaming mugs between them. Lena spoke first. Your file wasn't just one report. There were dozens threads buried in archives, redacted names, missing timestamps. Someone was systematically cleaning up the truth. Maria nodded slowly. Colonel Avery. I've seen that name, Lena said, but there's more. After your discharge, a handful of other analysts were reassigned or quietly pushed out. Same pattern. Anyone who asked too many questions vanished. Maria looked down. Classic internal containment. Lena leaned forward. But they didn't expect Webb to leak parts of your encrypted logs before they took him off the board. He copied segments to a civilian backup. We got them 2 months ago. Maria's throat tightened. He never told me. He couldn't, Lena said softly. They were watching him too. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped lightly against the window. Then Lena reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. These are your words, she said, sliding it across the table. Your voice. Every note, every annotation, every detail you wrote in those reports. We're preparing a full story, one that names everyone involved. But I need your permission. Maria stared at the folder. Her handwriting stared back, raw, direct, unmistakable. If she agreed, the world would know everything. If she refused, the truth would remain half-buried. But either way, her life as she knew it was already gone. She looked up. What happens to Webb? Lena hesitated. He's under review, medical leave officially, but he's safe for now. Maria nodded slowly. Then publish it. Are you sure? Once it's out, they can't take it back. They already took everything else, she said quietly. Let them have the silence, I'll keep the truth. The article dropped 3 weeks later. This time, it didn't hide behind anonymity. The analyst who wouldn't disappear, inside the Army's secret data war. By Lena Ortiz. Maria's name was printed in black and white. Her photo, a simple headshot from her service file, stared back at her from the screen. She looked tired, human. The story tore through the internet like wildfire. Networks debated it. Officials scrambled for statements. Some called her a hero. Others called her a traitor. Her inbox filled with messages, hundreds of them. Veterans, civilians, families of interpreters, strangers who just wanted to say they believed her. But among them was one message that made her stop breathing. From unknown sender. Subject: he be proud. Body: Farid's family is safe. They left last year. Your words reached them. She read it 3 times, then set the phone down gently. The world outside her window blurred. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. But peace didn't mean safety. 2 days later, a black car parked across the street from her apartment. It stayed there through the night, headlights off, no movement. By morning, it was gone. She didn't call anyone, didn't tell Lena, didn't flinch. This was just another kind of war, the kind that didn't use bullets. She learned to live with those. Months passed. The storm of media attention eventually moved on, as storms always do. But the damage had been done, and so had the change. Congress ordered an inquiry into the intelligence chain. Avery quietly resigned. Several reports were declassified. No one said her name in those hearings, but every line of questioning carried her fingerprints. Maria didn't attend. She didn't need to. Instead, she found work teaching data ethics at a small community college, a quiet job, far from command structures and classified rooms. Her students didn't know her story. To them, she was just another instructor with steady eyes and a habit of pausing before she spoke, as if weighing every word. Sometimes they'd ask, "Why does integrity matter so much in intelligence work?" And she'd smile, not bitterly, just softly. "Because lies don't die," she'd say. "They multiply." One afternoon after class, a young woman approached her. "Professor Santos." "Yes." The girl hesitated. "My brother served in Wardac. He never came back. I just wanted to say thank you for not letting it disappear." Maria felt her throat tighten. He was one of the good ones, wasn't he? The girl nodded. Maria reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then the world remembers him now. That's what matters." The student smiled through tears. "You really believe that?" Maria looked out the window, where sunlight spilled across the hallway floor like dust. "I have to," she said. "Otherwise, what was all this for?" That night she walked home under a pale sky. The city lights glowed like stars scattered across asphalt. Somewhere, a plane passed overhead, its low rumble fading into distance. She stopped for a moment, watching its path. In another life she might have been on it. Another mission, another uniform, another silence. But here now she was free. Not clean, not whole, just free. And maybe that was enough. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak." Then she smiled faintly. "It simply acts. Why do we return to the places that broke us?" Maria didn't know. Maybe because part of her had never really left. The air in Wardac still smelled the same: dry dust, diesel, smoke, faint sweetness from the apricot trees that clung stubbornly to the hillsides. It had been nearly 7 years since she'd last seen this valley. The colors hadn't changed. The silence had. She stepped off the convoy truck slowly, boots sinking into the powdery dirt. The sun burned high overhead. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the scarf covering her hair, not military now, just civilian modesty. "Are you sure you want to do this?" the UN field officer beside her asked. Maria nodded once. "I need to see it." They walked together toward the rebuilt village, new walls standing where craters once were, fresh paint over scars too deep to hide. Children ran barefoot past them, laughing. A young man waved, guiding a cart of bricks. Life had come back, stubborn and unafraid. But the ghosts were still here. She could feel them in the wind. It had taken months to get clearance for this trip. The army hadn't blocked her, but they hadn't helped either. In the end, it was the Sentinel that arranged it, a human interest feature about reconciliation, humanitarian rebuilding, closure. Maria didn't care about the headlines. She came for one thing only, to stand on the ground that had defined her life. The place where she stopped being invisible. The place where she learned the price of silence. The truck stopped near what used to be the old schoolhouse. She froze. The building was smaller than she remembered, repaired, repainted, but the shape was the same. The courtyard still held the stone well where the children had hidden during the firefight. She could almost hear their cries echoing through the years. The field officer gave her space. Maria walked to the well slowly, her boots tracing the same path she'd taken that morning in 2019, when the ridge exploded and the world went white. She touched the edge of the stone, running her fingers over its rough surface. There were new carvings etched into it now, small symbols, names in Dari. She bent closer, reading one. Farid. Her breath caught. A woman's voice spoke behind her. He was my father. Maria turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 19 or 20, dressed in a simple shawl, eyes dark and steady. Maria's throat tightened. Your father, Farid Rahman. The girl nodded. We heard what you did, how you spoke his name when everyone else forgot. Maria swallowed hard. I didn't do enough. You did more than most, the girl said softly. You gave him back to us. They stood in silence, the weight of years pressing between them. Then the girl reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She held it out. He left this behind, she said. Said it was meant for the woman with the quiet voice who called the sky. Maria unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small wooden prayer bead, chipped, faded, but still warm from the girl's hands. For a long moment, Maria couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Later, she sat on a hillside overlooking the valley. The wind moved gently through the grass. Below, the rebuilt homes shimmered in the afternoon heat. She thought about all the years between then and now, the coffee tray, the interrogation room, the endless reports, the silence that had nearly devoured her. And she thought about all the people who hadn't survived it. Wardac had taught her that heroism wasn't loud. It was endurance, the ability to stay human in a machine that rewarded obedience over conscience. She reached into her bag and took out a small box, the one thing she'd kept all these years. Inside, her silver star lay nestled in faded velvet. She hadn't looked at it in months. She held it to the light. It glimmered, faintly reflecting the valley below. Not a symbol of valor, she realized, but of memory. A reminder that courage doesn't end when the war does. Sometimes it begins after. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, Maria heard footsteps behind her. It was Lena Ortiz, camera slung around her shoulder. Beautiful view, Lena said quietly. Maria smiled faintly. It wasn't once. Lena sat beside her. You okay? I am, Maria said after a pause. Finally. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade over the valley. Lena eventually asked, do you ever regret it, going public? Maria considered the question. Every day, she said honestly, and not at all. Lena nodded. That's a complicated answer. So is truth. Later that night, they stayed in a small guest house near the outpost. Power flickered. The generator hummed. Outside, the stars blazed bright and endless. Maria couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, barefoot, standing in the cool sand. The night was still except for the faint sound of a distant call to prayer. She looked up. The same stars she'd seen years ago when the sky was on fire. Now they looked peaceful. She spoke softly into the dark. For everyone who didn't come home, for everyone who wasn't believed. The wind carried her words away, scattering them across the valley. And maybe, just maybe, they reached whoever was listening. The next morning before they left, she walked back to the well one last time. The young woman who'd given her the prayer bead was there again, fetching water. Maria knelt by the stone, unpinned the silver star from its box, and held it out. The girl shook her head. "No, that's yours." Maria smiled gently. "It's ours." She set it down at the base of the well, beside the carved name. Then she stood, brushing dust from her knees. "Tell your people he wasn't forgotten," she said. "I will," the girl replied. Maria turned and began walking toward the truck. With each step, something lifted from her shoulders slowly, invisibly but real. By the time she reached the road, the valley behind her was glowing with sunlight. Months later, back home, the Sentinel published one last piece. Sergeant Maria Santos returns to Wardac, the woman who chose truth over silence. The photo showed her standing by the well, hand resting on the stone, sunlight haloing her profile. The caption read, "Sometimes courage isn't about fighting, it's about remembering." Maria didn't watch the coverage. She didn't need to. She had made peace with being a ghost in her own story. But one morning, when she opened her mailbox, there was a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, a group of Afghan children standing beside the well. In the center, the silver star gleamed faintly against the stone. On the back, a single line in careful handwriting. "Still shining." Maria smiled. That evening, she sat by her window as dusk settled over the city. The streetlights flickered on one by one, like stars finding their courage again. She sipped her coffee slowly, the same way she used to before missions, before briefings, before everything changed. She didn't think about medals or titles or scars. She thought about the people she'd met, the lives that had touched hers quietly and left without ceremony. And she realized something simple and small, but truer than anything she'd ever written in a report. War doesn't end when the guns stop. It ends when someone finally remembers why they were fired. She set the cup down, closed her eyes and breathed in the stillness. No fear. No bitterness. Just peace. Outside, a helicopter passed far overhead, distant, fatting, almost gentle. Maria listened until the sound disappeared into the night. Then she whispered, the words steady and final. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak." She smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon. "It simply acts."